"Let it fly," the man said, and pointed at the sky over my head as if the sky were a thing he had already bought. I did not look up. I had heard the drone before he spoke, a high, flat hum, the sound of a wasp the size of a dinner plate hanging somewhere above the forecourt, and I had already made my decision before the first word left his mouth. Behind a face the public reads as carved stone, I can tell you exactly what I was thinking. I was thinking, nothing flies over this roof on a whim. Not for him. Not for anyone with a card to swipe and a crew to clap when he wins. His name does not matter, and I will not invent one for him beyond what he was. A guest of the house that week, a man with more cameras than friends, the sort who travels with a young woman holding a ring light and two men holding nothing but their phones. He had a watch the size of a coaster, and the easy, sunny confidence of a person who had not been told no since he was small. He had been welcomed through the visitor's arch an hour before with every courtesy due a guest of standing. And now he stood on the cobbles of Harlow Court, the great gravel and stone forecourt of Whiston House, the fictional seat I have stood for 9 years, and he wanted me to wave his machine over the slates. "It's just a quick pass," he said, smiling. "Establishing shot 2 minutes. You won't even hear it." He had already heard it himself. We both had. The lie was so small and so confident that it told me everything about how the next 10 minutes would go. I held my post, eyes forward, rifle at my shoulder in the rest, white gloves still. The bearskin sat heavy and the noon light came down hard and clean on the gravel, and the drone went on humming above us like a held breath. To the people filming on their phones at the rope, I was a statue that had not so much as blinked. Inside the statue, I was already counting the seconds the thing had been airborne, counting the windows it could see into from where it hung, counting the distance to the marksman's roost on the east parapet where I knew a man was, at that exact moment, lifting a pair of binoculars to his eyes and asking the same questions I was asking. The man's name does not matter, the roof does. I should tell you what the roof is, because the whole of this turns on it and on the small, unglamorous truth that the public never sees. Whiston House is not a film set. It is a working royal household, offices, residences, a strong room older than the trees, a wing where decisions are made that the morning papers report a day later as though they fell from the air. Above it sits a column of sky that the public imagines is empty and free, and that is in fact one of the most carefully governed spaces in the realm. No fly. Permanent. Not a sometimes rule, not a weekend rule, not a rule that bends for a guest who has booked a tour and brought a toy. A standing restriction, registered, mapped, and enforced. A circle of forbidden air with the house at its center, and the slates of that roof the bottom of a glass dome no one is allowed to break from above. The man with the watch did not know that. Or he knew it and had decided, as men like him decide, that the rule was a soft thing made for other people. Either way, his machine was in my dome, and that was the part of the morning that had stopped being about courtesy. "Officer," he said, "I am a corporal, but the word does the same work in his mouth. I cleared this. I cleared it with someone." He waved a hand back toward the visitor's office as if a name lived there that would settle it. "Ariel, for the feature. Your people said it was fine." My people had said no such thing. I knew that the way you know your own breathing. But I am not the man who debates a guest on the cobbles, and I do not break my stillness to argue. I have a thing I do instead, and I did it now. I turned my head a precise eighth of an inch not toward him, toward the corner of the arch where a steady young soldier named Pell stood his own post, and I let that small movement carry the whole of my message. Eyes up. Log it. "Get the desk." Pell had seen the drone before either of us spoke. He was already speaking low into the collar of his tunic, and somewhere in a room I cannot see from the forecourt, a light had begun to blink on a board that maps the dome over the house. The hum above us was not just a nuisance now. It was a track. It was a contact. It was a thing the house had begun, very quietly, to deal with. The man took my stillness for the surrender he was used to. "There," he said to the woman with the ring light, grinning, "see, he's not going to stop it. They're not allowed to, that's the bit. He can't move. He stepped closer, into the band of space a guest is not supposed to enter, and lifted his own phone to film me filming nothing. Take the rooftop pass, he called up to the man working the controller behind him, a thin fellow in a black cap who had been pretending to be a tourist. Go right over. Get the courtyard, get the windows, get the lot. And the drone climbed. I want to be honest about what went through me in that second, because the public version of a guard is a man with no inside. The truth is the opposite. The discipline is not the absence of feeling. It is the lid on a great deal of it. When that machine tipped its nose and began to climb toward the slates, toward the windows of a wing where a man older and more careful than any of us was at that hour working, I felt the old cold thing wake up in my chest, the thing they trained into me long before the bearskin, the thing that says the line is here and you do not let it pass, whatever it costs your stillness. I did not let it move me. That is the entire job. You hold the cold thing and you let the system do the moving. So I held, and the system began to move. The first sign of it was small, and only I would have caught it. The marksman on the east parapet shifted his stance. Not to aim. We do not shoot machines out of the sky over a forecourt full of phones. That is not how a disciplined house behaves, and it is not how this story goes. But to watch, to range, to be ready in the way that men are ready when a thing has crossed from nuisance into contact. The second sign was Pell, still murmuring, his hand flat against his collar, his eyes tracking the drones climb the way a gun layer tracks a target. The third sign was the sound. A sound the man with the watch did not notice because he was looking at his own phone, of a door opening somewhere behind the colonnade, and unhurried boots crossing stone. The drone reached the height of the first-floor windows and slid sideways along the face of the house, its little gimbaled eye swiveling to drink the glass. Beautiful, the man breathed. Look at that, get the whole front, now up over the. Bring it down. The voice was not loud. It came from the colonnade, level and unbothered, and it belonged to a woman in the plain, dark suit of the household's own security, Warden Eames, though the man would not learn her name for some minutes yet and would not enjoy it when he did. She walked out onto the gravel without hurry, the way people walk when the outcome is already decided and only the guest hasn't been told. She did not look at the man with the watch. She looked up at the machine, and then at the thin fellow in the black cap with the controller, and she said it again, in exactly the same tone, which is the tone that frightens men like these far more than shouting ever could. Bring it down now, while you still can do it yourself. The man with the watch turned, and I watched the morning change shape on his face. He had built a whole little world in the last 10 minutes, a world in which the guard could not stop him. The rule was a suggestion, and the worst that could happen was a stern word he could edit out later. Warden Eames had walked into that world, and the world had not survived contact. He did the thing such men always do at this exact moment. He got louder, to fill the space where his certainty used to be. "And who are you?" he said. "I'm the person telling you to land your aircraft," she said. "There's no version of the next 5 minutes where it stays up. There's only a version where you bring it down, and a version where it comes down a much harder way and you spend a great deal of money and time explaining why. Your choice. You have it for about 30 seconds. He laughed, the bark of a man who is sure that somewhere a phone call will fix this. "Do you know who I'm a guest of? Do you have any idea what this footage is worth? I have permission. I cleared the aerial." He flung a hand at me again as if I were a witness on his side. He didn't stop me. He stood right there and let it go up. "He held his post," Eames said, "which is exactly what he is meant to do. He doesn't chase your machine across the gravel. He doesn't break formation for a man with a drone. He holds the line and the line holds, and the rest of us come and do the parts that aren't his to do. That's not him failing to stop you. That's the house working the way it's built." She still had not raised her voice. "Land it. 20 seconds. I will say a word here about that, because it is the heart of why I stand the way I stand, and why men like the one with the watch misread it every single time. They look at the stillness and they read weakness, a man so bound by rules he cannot act, a statue they can walk past. They have it exactly backward. The stillness is not the absence of the response. The stillness is the first move of a response that has a great many more parts than they can see, and the parts they cannot see are the ones that end the thing. I am the still center. The marksman is a part, Pell is a part, the desk with the blinking board is a part, Warden Eames crossing the gravel is a part. The man thought he had beaten the whole house by getting past me. He had not gotten past anything. He had simply walked far enough into the machine to feel its teeth. The thin fellow in the black cap had stopped pretending to be a tourist. He was looking at his controller, then at Eames, then at the man who paid him, with the particular misery of a hired hand who has just understood that the trouble is real, and the man who hired him will not be the one holding it. His thumbs hovered. He wanted to land the thing. You could see it. "Don't you dare land it," the man with the watch snapped at him. "We paid for the shot." "Get the shot." And to Eames, "You can't seize my property. That's my drone. That's private property. You touch it and I'll—" "Nobody's touching your property," Eames said. "We're not going to touch it. We don't have to." And she said something then that I have thought about many times since, because it is the truest description of how the modern version of this house defends itself that I have ever heard. "You think the danger is one of us walking over and grabbing it. It isn't. The danger to you is that your aircraft is already a line on 3 different screens that aren't on this forecourt, and every second it stays up writes another line under it. The forecourt is the least of your problems. Land it, and the forecourt is the only asterisk one. Keep it up, and you'll be explaining yourself to people who have never heard of you, and won't be impressed when they do." For the first time, something flickered behind the man's sunny confidence. Not understanding. Men like him do not understand until much later, in a quiet room with a lawyer, but the animal scent of a thing going wrong in a way he had not budgeted for. That was when the drone twitched. It was a small thing high above us, but I saw it and Eames saw it and the thin fellow saw it most of all, because it happened on his own screen first and his face went the color of the gravel. The machine had been hanging steady, drinking the windows. Now it jerked, a hard sideways stagger, as if a hand had cuffed it, and the steady hum broke into a stuttering whine. The little gimballed eye swung wildly. The thin fellow stabbed at his controller, his thumbs suddenly frantic, and the drone did not answer him. "What's it doing?" the man with the watch said. The grin was gone now. "What did you do to it?" "We didn't do anything to it," Eames said. And for the first time there was the faintest edge under the calm, not anger, something closer to the grim satisfaction of a person watching a rule she has defended for years prove itself in front of the man who scorned it. "That's the dome. I will not pretend to understand every part of what protects the air over Whiston House, because it is not my part, and the men and women whose part it is do not explain it to corporals on the forecourt, and rightly so. But I have stood here 9 years, and you learn the shape of a thing even when you are not told its workings. The roof is not guarded only by the rule on the map, and the marksman on the parapet and the eyes of men like me. It is guarded by the air itself, by something woven invisibly through the dome that does not strike a machine down so much as it takes the machine away from the hand that flew it, gently and firmly, the way you take a sharp thing from a child. The drone had not been shot. It had not been grabbed. It had simply, the instant it climbed high enough and stayed long enough, stopped belonging to the thin fellow with the controller and started belonging to the house. I watched it happen the way you watch a fish that has run to the end of a line finally turn. The wild swinging stopped. The stuttering whine smoothed back into a steady hum, but a different hum now, a hum with no one on the forecourt behind it. The little eye stopped swiveling. And the machine began, with an awful unhurried obedience, to descend, not toward the thin fellow, not toward the man with the watch, but in a slow, deliberate diagonal toward the far corner of the forecourt, where a second figure in a plain dark suit had appeared, holding a flat case open in both hands like a man waiting to receive something he had ordered. "You can't," the man with the watch started. He moved then, actually moved, a half step toward the descending machine, his hand out as if he might pluck it from the air and carry his shot home in his fist. And here is the only moment in the whole morning when I came close to breaking my own stillness, because a man lunging across a royal forecourt is a different thing entirely from a man flying a drone, and the rules that govern what I may and may not do change in that instant. I felt my weight shift onto the balls of my feet. I felt the long training gather itself behind my eyes. I did not need it. Pell stepped cleanly into the man's path, not roughly, not a shove, just the immovable fact of a soldier's body placed precisely where a foolish man wanted to go, and said the three words that the household teaches every one of us for exactly this: "Sir, stand still." And the man, who had spent the whole morning ordering everyone else, stood still, because there are men whose stillness is an order all by itself, and Pell at that moment was one of them. I let my weight settle back. The line had held, and it had held without me. "It's already done," Eames said. "It stopped being a question about a minute ago. Now it's just paperwork, and the paperwork is going to be considerable." She finally looked at him, full on, and I saw the man flinch from a gaze that had nothing in it but a calm and total certainty. "You told my corporal you'd cleared an aerial pass with the visitor's office. You told him your people said it was fine. I'd think hard about whether you want that on the record, because we're about to check it, and when it isn't true, and it isn't, I've already had it confirmed in my ear while you were talking, that stops being a misunderstanding, and starts being a false statement made to gain access over a restricted royal site, which is a different sort of mourning entirely." The drone settled into the open case with a final descending whir, and the man holding the case closed it, and the hum stopped, and the forecourt was suddenly very quiet except for the small, ordinary sounds of gravel and pigeons and the distant traffic beyond the walls. The thin fellow in the black cap stood holding a controller that now commanded nothing, looking at it as though it had betrayed him personally. And through it all, I had not moved. I want you to hold on to that, because it is the part that the people at the rope were filming, and the part the man with the watch could never make sense of. The whole thing, the order, the climb, the warden, the dome, the descent, the case snapping shut on a machine that had cost more than I make in a year. The whole of it had happened in front of a guard who stood at the rest with his rifle on his shoulder and his eyes forward and his white gloves still, and who had, by every appearance, done absolutely nothing at all. I had done the one thing that mattered. I had held the line so that the line was there to hold. The man with the watch was not finished. They never are at this stage. The certainty drains slowly, and there is always a phase of bargaining before the cold understanding sets in. He pulled himself up to his full height and reached for the tool he trusted most. "Do you know," he said, "how many people are going to see this? I have an audience of millions. I came here to make something beautiful about this place, to show it to the world, and this is the welcome I get: threats, seizure, accusations. When I tell my people what happened here today, when this goes out." "Tell them," Eames said, "tell all of them. Tell them you flew an unauthorized aircraft over a restricted royal household, that you claimed a permission you didn't have, that you ordered your operator to overfly residential windows after being asked to land, and that the house brought your machine down without laying a finger on it and without raising its voice." She let that sit. "Tell them the guard never moved. That's the part they'll remember anyway. They always do." What happened over the next half hour was the part of this work the public never sees, and it is the part I am proudest of, because it has nothing to do with me standing still, and everything to do with what standing still makes possible. A house does not defend its airspace with one man on a forecourt. It defends it with a great many quiet people doing exactly their jobs at exactly the right moment. None of them shouting, all of them moving in a kind of slow current that the man with the watch could feel closing around him, but could not see the shape of. The first to arrive was the steward's deputy, a precise gray man named Mar who carries the visitor's day book the way a priest carries a missal. He came across the gravel with 2 folders and a face that gave nothing away, and he did the single most devastating thing that can be done to a man who has lied about a permission. He opened the book. "You arrived at 11:10, Mar said, not unkindly reading. "On a standard interior and garden tour party of 4, the booking is here. Your signature is here, against the conditions of entry which you initialed, and which include 3rd line, you may read it yourself, a prohibition on any aerial photography, any unmanned aircraft, any drone, anywhere on or above the estate, without separate written authorization from the Air Liaison Office, which is granted, on average, twice a year, and which was not sought and not granted in your case." He turned the folder so the man could see his own initials in his own ink. "There is no aerial permission, sir. There was never any aerial permission. The visitor's office has no record of any conversation in which one was discussed, requested, or implied, and I have just spoken to every officer who was on the desk this morning. So I'd ask you calmly and once, who exactly told you it was fine?" The man with the watch opened his mouth, and for the first time nothing came out, because the answer was no one. The answer was that he had decided it would be fine, the way he decided everything would be fine, and had said so out loud often enough that he had come to believe a permission existed somewhere in the world simply because he wanted it to. My team handles the clearances," he managed. "If there was a mix-up, that's on. Your operator," Mar said, glancing at the thin fellow in the black cap, "will be asked the same question separately. So I'd encourage you both to find the same answer now, because in about 10 minutes you'll be giving it to people who compare them." He closed the book. "The aircraft will be held as the subject of a reportable incident over restricted airspace. That's not the House's choice. That's the law, and it left the House's hands the moment it crossed the line. You'll each be asked for identification, for your flight records, and for the registration of the aircraft, which is required and which I'd very much like to hope you have, because the alternative is worse. There is an office inside the House that the public has never heard of and never will, and it is the office that owns the dome, the Air Liaison Office. A few quiet people in a quiet room whose entire working life is the column of governed sky over the slates, who answer to the people who answer to the people who keep the airspace of the realm, and who had, by the time Mar closed his book, already logged the track, timed the flight, noted the overflight of the residential face, and confirmed in 3 separate ears on that forecourt that no authorization existed under any name, on any day, for any aircraft belonging to the man with the watch. I did not see them. I never see them. But I felt the morning tighten the way a net tightens, each unseen hand drawing its own corner, and I understood, standing still on the gravel, that the man had not provoked a guard. He had provoked an institution, and the institution had simply gone about its business with the unhurried thoroughness of a thing that has done this many times and will do it many times again. That is what the order giver never grasps until it is far too late, that the still man in the bearskin is the visible edge of something very large and very patient, and that walking past him does not mean you have gotten past anything at all. The thin fellow, to his enormous credit and his own salvation, chose that moment to stop being loyal to the wrong man. "It's registered," he said quietly. "It's all registered. I've got the operator's certificate. I told him." His voice cracked on the last part, and he turned to the man with the watch with an expression I have seen before on the faces of hired men at the moment they decide to save themselves. "I told you it was a no-fly. I showed you the map this morning. You said you'd cleared it. You said it was handled." "Don't," the man with the watch said. "You said it was handled asterisk," the thin fellow repeated, louder to everyone now, to Mar and to Eames and to the rope full of phones. "And I trusted you, and I'm not going to lose my certificate so you can have your establishing shot. It was a no-fly. I knew it was a no-fly." He told me to fly it anyway. And there it was, the whole architecture of the lie, pulled out into the noon light by the man with the watch had been certain would stay bought. The crew with the phones had stopped filming the guard. They were filming their own employer now, which is its own kind of justice in that man's world, and he knew it, and the knowing of it did more to his face than any warden's words had managed. That was when the current widened past the walls of the house entirely. A vehicle I had not heard arrive, quiet, dark, unremarkable, had pulled up beyond the visitor's arch, and from it came 2 officers of the aviation police, the people whose entire profession is the protection of governed sky. They did not hurry. They did not need to. The incident had been reported the instant the drone climbed. The track had been logged. The descent had been recorded. And by the time they crossed the gravel, they already knew more about the morning than the man with the watch knew about himself. One of them carried a tablet. The other carried nothing but the unbothered authority of a person who deals with men far more dangerous than this one before lunch on an ordinary day. Whose aircraft, the first officer said. It was not really a question. The thin fellow raised a hand at once. The man with the watch did not, which told the officer everything, because a man who has done nothing wrong cannot wait to say so, and this man had gone very quiet indeed. I have stood on this forecourt for a great deal of weather and a great many provocations, and I have learned to read the exact moment. A powerful man understands that his power has run out of road. It is not loud. It is the opposite of loud. It is a kind of inward folding, a settling, the look of a man recalculating a life that he had been sure was a straight line, and that has just turned a hard corner he did not see coming. The man with the watch reached that moment standing on the gravel of Whiston House with an aviation officer in front of him. His own operator turned witness against him. The household's daybook open with his initials in it. His machine sealed in a flat black case, and a wall of phones recording every second of it for the very audience he had threatened us with. He had come to take a beautiful image of the house. The house had taken a true one of him. "I'd like to call my lawyer," he said. The sunny confidence was entirely gone. The voice was small. "You're free to do that," the aviation officer said. "You're not under arrest. This is a reportable airspace incident, and you and your operator will be required to give an account, provide identification, and answer for an unauthorized flight over a restricted royal site. You'll do that today here, in a room the house will provide, and the report will go where these reports go." He took out a card and held it out, and the man took it the way a man takes a thing he does not understand. "Whether this ends with a caution, a fine, or the loss of your operator standing in this country is not decided on this gravel, but I'll tell you what I tell everyone who does this. The rule you broke wasn't there to inconvenience you. It was there because the people who live and work under that roof are entitled to a sky over their heads that strangers can't reach into for a photograph. You decided your shot was worth more than that. It isn't. It never is." And that, said plainly, by a tired professional who had said it 100 times before, was the whole of the morning in a single breath. Nothing flies over this roof on a whim. Not for money, not for an audience of millions, not for a beautiful establishing shot. The sky over the house is not empty space waiting to be used. It is part of the house. And a great quiet apparatus exists, of which I am the most visible and least active part, to make sure that anyone who forgets it is reminded, calmly, completely, and without the house ever once raising its voice. They took the man and his operator away through the colonnade, to a plain room, to a long afternoon of accounts and identifications, and the slow grinding of the machinery that he had set in motion, the instant he pointed at my sky, and said, "Let it fly." The crew with the ring light packed up in silence. The young woman who had held it looked at me for a long moment before she went, a different look than the one she'd worn an hour before, when she had laughed along with him about the guard who could not move. I do not know what she was thinking. I like to believe she had understood something. The crowd at the rope dispersed slowly, the way crowds do when the show is over and they are not quite sure what they saw, except that they were sure of one thing, and they said it to each other as they drifted off. And I heard it the way you hear things you are not meant to hear when you are a fixed point that people forget can listen. He never moved, did you see? The whole time he never moved. I want to tell you what it costs, that not moving, because the world that filmed it has it exactly wrong, and the man with the watch had it wrong, and even the kind ones at the rope who admired me had it a little wrong. They think the stillness is the easy part, that the hard men are the warden and the aviation officers and the unseen hand in the dome that took the drone away, and that the guard is the decoration, the unmoving ornament in front of the real work. It is the other way around, and I will tell you why. Every part of that morning that moved asterisk was free to move. Warden Eames could cross the gravel, Marr could open his book, the aviation officers could ask their questions, the dome could take the machine. They acted, and acting is its own relief. When you are doing something, the doing carries you. I could do none of it. I stood at the rest with my rifle on my shoulder, while a man ordered an aircraft over the windows of people I am sworn to keep safe, and the entire animal in me wanted to step out of formation and end it with my own 2 hands, and I did not, because that is the discipline, and the discipline is not weakness, and it is not the absence of the response. It is the hardest and most necessary part of the response. If I move, the line moves. If the line moves, the man with the watch wins, because the whole point of his game was to make the guard react, to make the still center crack so that the house looked like a place that could be provoked into chaos by anyone with a toy and an audience. The instant I broke my post to chase his drone, I would have handed him exactly the footage he came for. The guard undone, the house in disarray, the rule made to look like a man's temper rather than the calm, total, unbreakable thing it is. So I held, and because I held, the warden could walk and the book could open and the dome could close its hand and the aviation officers could arrive to a forecourt that was, by every appearance, perfectly serene, a place where nothing had gone wrong, because the one man whose job it was to be the proof that nothing was wrong had not so much as turned his head. My stillness was not the decoration on the response. It was the foundation of it. They could all move because I did not. That is the thing they trained into me before the bearskin, on harder ground than this, in a life I do not talk about on the forecourt. The line is held by the man who refuses to be the one who breaks it. Anyone can react. Reacting is what the man with the watch was counting on. The discipline is to be the fixed point around which everything else is free to turn, to take the order to let it fly, and the climb, and the windows, and the certainty of a powerful man that the rule would bend for him, and to answer all of it with nothing but a held post and a precise 1/8 of an inch turn of the head that says log it, get the desk, the house will do the rest, and the house did the rest. The house always does the rest if the man on the forecourt holds. The steward came out himself near the end, when the gravel was nearly empty again. He is not a man who comes out often, and he came not to thank me. We do not do that here. The job is the thanks, but to stand for a moment at the edge of the colonnade and look up at the roof, at the slates and the windows and the column of governed sky above them, the dome that a stranger had tried to reach into and failed. Then he looked at me and gave the smallest nod a man can give and still mean it entirely, and went back inside. That nod was the whole of my reward, and it was enough, and it was more than the man with the watch will ever understand about why a person would stand on cold gravel and hold a line he could so easily break. The relief came at the change of the watch, as it always does, on the second, the way the chain has handed itself along under that roof for longer than any of us has been alive. I marched off the post with the drone long gone and the man with the watch deep in his afternoon of accounts, and I handed the corner to the soldier who took it from me, and I said the only words we say at the handover, which are not about drones or wardens or aviation police, but about the one thing that does not change. The post is held. He took it. The post stayed held. It will be held tonight and tomorrow, and after I am too old to hold it, by men who understand that the sky over the house is part of the house, and that nothing flies over this roof on a whim. Not for a powerful man, not for a beautiful shot, not for an audience of millions, not for anything but the rare written word of the people whose long and unglamorous job is to keep the dome whole. Sometime that evening, the clip went out into the world, the way the man had promised it would, though not the way he had meant. It did not show the house undone. It showed a forecourt where a guard stood like carved stone, while a powerful man ordered a machine over the windows and was answered without a single raised voice, by a house that simply closed around him and held until he understood. People watched it by the millions, as he'd boasted they would. And they did not remember his name, and they did not remember the wardens, or the stewards, or the aviation officers, or mine, because I have no name to them and never will. They remembered the stillness. They remembered the man who did not move while everything moved around him, and they understood the way people do understand, when they are shown a true thing instead of a beautiful one, that the not moving was the strongest thing in the frame, that the line had been held by the man who refused to break it, that the house had won the way a disciplined house always wins, quietly, completely, and on its feet. I went back the next morning and I stood my post, and the sky over the roof was empty and governed and whole, the way it is meant to be, the way it will stay. A few visitors at the rope lifted their phones and took their pictures of the guard who does not move, and I let them because that is allowed, and that is the difference, and the difference is the entire point. They could photograph me all they liked from the gravel where they belonged. But nothing flies over this roof on a whim. I am the still proof of it, and I held.